In this video we are going to focus on 5 properties of multiplication. The properties that we're going to focus on are the commutative property, the associative property, the distributive property, the identity property, and the zero property. So let's get into it and start off with the zero property of multiplication. In the zero property of multiplication, it states that any number when multiplied by 0 is equal to 0. So this one is actually really easy to identify. Look at your problem. Say here we have 9 times 0. If it has a 0 in it, we can say that it's part of the zero property because 9 times 0 is 0 and the property is true. Any number multiplied by 0 is 0. If we have something such as this, 5 times 2 is not an example of the zero property because we do not have 0 anywhere as one of our factors. And our product is not 0. Our product here would be 10. So zero property, any number times 0 is 0. Our next property is the identity property, which states that any number times 1 is that number. So 5 times 1 is equal to 5. I like to explain this as you aren't changing the number's identity. 5 times 1 is still going to give us 5. That number's identity has not changed, and it stays the same. So 5 times 1, or any number, times 1 is going to give you that same number, and that is the identity property. For our next property, I've chosen the commutative property. The commutative property states that the order of the numbers in multiplication does not matter. So an example would be 3 times 2 is equal to 2 times 3. We can change the order of the numbers. Look what I've done. I've moved the 3 over here and the 2 over here for these examples. And the product is still going to be the same. 3 times 2 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6, and they are equal to each other. In any multiplication problem, if all you're doing is multiplying, you can change the order of the numbers. And this even applies to when we have 3 or more numbers. As long as the only operation is multiplication, the order of the numbers does not matter. Here, this is equal to 40, and over here it is also equal to 40. So commutative property of multiplication, the order of the numbers that you are multiplying does not affect the product. It does not matter. Much like the commutative property, the associative property deals with only multiplication. It does not have any other operation in the property, only multiplication. And what it says is, when you have 3 or more numbers being multiplied, the product is the same regardless of how the numbers are grouped. And here the grouping is shown with parentheses. So notice I've grouped up the 3 and the 4 here, and I've grouped up the 2 and the 3 here. Our product is still going to be the same. It's still going to be 24, even though, based on the order of operations, I have to multiply this first, which gets us 12. So 12 times 2 is 24. And over here, I have to multiply these first. So we get 6 times 4, which is still 24. The associative property says the way that you group the factors does not affect the product. And this leads us to our last property of multiplication. In the distributive property of multiplication, notice that we have multiplication signs, but we also have addition signs that are inside of parentheses. They're grouped together. And with the distributive property, what it basically says is the sum of two numbers times a third number, the sum of two numbers times a third number, is equal to the sum of each addend, which is the 3 and the 5, times the third number. So you can multiply them separately instead of adding at first, and it's not going to affect the product. What has basically happened is, instead of just multiplying 2 times 8, which is what we would have if we added this here, we multiply the 2 times the 3, and then we also multiply it by the 5. That gives us 6 and 10, which is equal to 16. And if we had just added this, we'd have 8, so 2 times 8, which is still 16. So with the distributive property, we are distributing the multiplication number to both numbers or more inside the parentheses to get 2 times 3 and 2 times 5. And there you have it. Those are the 5 properties of multiplication.